The discovery of the tomb. The desert sun hung low over the golden sands of Egypt, casting long shadows across the Valley of the Kings, a place where the echoes of the past whispered in the hot, dry wind. It was the year 1922, and for years this valley had been searched and searched again by archaeologists, treasure hunters, and adventurers, each hoping to uncover the secrets of Egypt's long-dead pharaohs. Many believed there was nothing left to find. The tombs had been robbed centuries ago, their treasures scattered, their mummies desecrated. But one man refused to give up hope. His name was Howard Carter, a determined British archaeologist with sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of patience. For 6 long years, he had been combing the valley, following every faint clue, every whisper from history that might lead him to something extraordinary. His sponsor, Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy English nobleman with a love for ancient mysteries, had spent a fortune funding Carter's excavations. But year after year, their efforts seemed to turn up nothing but dust and disappointment. Lord Carnarvon was close to calling it quits, but Carter convinced him to fund one final season. That decision would change history forever. On a cool November morning, Carter's workers uncovered the top step of a staircase buried deep beneath centuries of sand and rubble. As they cleared more steps, the air around the dig site seemed to grow heavier with anticipation. Step by step, they descended into the earth, their torches flickering against the stone walls, until they reached a sealed doorway. The plaster was still intact, and on it was stamped the royal seal of Tutankhamun, a boy king whose short reign had long been forgotten by history. Carter's heart pounded in his chest. The seal suggested that this tomb had never been opened since it was sealed over 3,000 years ago. Could it really be untouched? Could they have stumbled upon the only unrobbed royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings? With trembling hands, Carter ordered the entrance to be cleared. He decided to wait for Lord Carnarvon before breaking through. Days later, Carnarvon arrived, and together they prepared to enter. On November 26, 1922, Carter made a small hole in the doorway and pushed through a candle. Warm air rushed out from within, air that had been trapped for millennia. He peered inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light, and what he saw would later become one of the most famous moments in archaeological history. Gold everywhere, glittering statues, jewel-encrusted furniture, chariots, and strange objects whose purposes were lost to time. Carter stood in awe, his heart racing, his voice barely above a whisper when Carnarvon, unable to contain himself, asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter replied, "Yes, wonderful things." The tomb was packed with treasures beyond imagination, but this was only the beginning. What lay beyond this first chamber would shock the world even more. Over the next few days, Carter and his team began cataloging the objects, carefully moving deeper into the tomb. There was an eerie stillness inside, as if the spirits of the dead were watching them. Egyptian workers muttered quietly about ancient curses, warning that the tomb was protected by magic meant to punish anyone who disturbed it. Carter, a man of science, laughed it off, focusing instead on preserving the artifacts. Finally, they reached a second sealed door. Breaking through, they entered the burial chamber. There, resting in a massive stone sarcophagus, was the mummy of Tutankhamun himself, adorned with a golden death mask so beautiful and so haunting that it would become an icon of ancient Egypt. The boy king had died young, no older than 19, and his tomb was small compared to those of other pharaohs, suggesting he had not been prepared for death in the way great kings usually were. Yet somehow, his burial place had escaped the fate of so many others. It was untouched, perfect, and preserved through the ages. Outside the tomb, the news of the discovery spread like wildfire. Newspapers around the world carried the headline, "Tutankhamun's tomb found intact." Crowds of tourists, journalists, and scholars poured into the Valley of the Kings, eager to catch a glimpse of history being uncovered. But along with the excitement came whispers of a curse. Egyptian legends spoke of terrible fates awaiting those who disturbed the rest of the pharaohs. Some claimed there were inscriptions on tomb walls warning intruders, Death will come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king. Carter brushed these stories aside, calling them romantic nonsense invented by storytellers. But then, something strange happened, something that would ignite one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. Just months after entering the tomb, Lord Carnarvon, Carter's sponsor and the man who had made this discovery possible, fell seriously ill. He had been bitten by a mosquito, and the wound became infected after he accidentally cut it while shaving. Within weeks, he was dead. The newspapers exploded with headlines, "Curse of the Pharaoh kills Carnarvon." Reporters painted vivid pictures of a supernatural revenge from beyond the grave. They claimed that at the exact moment of Carnarvon's death, all the lights in Cairo went out. Some even said his beloved dog, far away in England, let out a terrible howl and died at the same moment. To the public, this was no coincidence, it was the curse. And it was only the beginning. The whisper of the curse. The death of Lord Carnarvon sent shockwaves through the world. In the days following his passing, the press seemed almost obsessed with painting the tragedy as the work of an ancient and vengeful force. Reporters flocked to the Valley of the Kings, their typewriters clattering with stories of curses, omens, and mysterious coincidences. Some wrote that when Carnarvon died, his wound was in the exact same spot on his face where Tutankhamun's mummy bore a dark mark. Others claimed that Carter himself had discovered a small inscription inside the tomb that read, "They who enter this sacred tomb shall swift be visited by the wings of death." Carter denied such an inscription existed, insisting these tales were purely the product of excited imaginations. But the public, already enchanted by the exotic mystery of ancient Egypt, was not so easily convinced. Soon, every illness, accident, or misfortune that befell anyone connected to the excavation was whispered to be the curse at work. Within a year, more deaths followed. George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier who had visited the tomb, died of pneumonia shortly afterward. A member of Carter's excavation team, A.C. Mace, fell gravely ill and passed away. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist who had taken X-rays of the mummy, also met an untimely death. The pattern was enough to keep the newspapers feeding the public's appetite for the supernatural. The more the press wrote, the deeper the myth of the curse sank into the popular imagination. Meanwhile, Howard Carter pressed on with his work inside the tomb, refusing to let superstition slow the excavation. But even he could not ignore the strange atmosphere that seemed to settle over the dig site. The air inside the tomb was still and heavy, as if untouched for centuries. Each time a new chamber was opened, the scent of ancient resins, perfumes, and age-old dust would escape, carrying with it an almost tangible sense of history. Workers sometimes reported hearing faint noises deep in the tomb, soft rustles, like the brushing of cloth, or the quiet tapping of unseen hands against stone. Carter, ever the rationalist, explained these as natural sounds of settling air or falling sand. Yet, when the Egyptian foreman lost a canary to a sudden cobra attack inside Carter's own home, whispers spread quickly among the local workers. The cobra was the symbol of the Egyptian monarchy, a guardian against enemies of the pharaoh. To them, this was a clear warning from Tutankhamun's spirit. The belief in the curse was not just a superstition for the Egyptians, it was a deep cultural respect for the dead and their sacred resting places. In ancient times, the tombs were more than just graves, they were eternal houses for the ka, or soul, of the pharaoh. Disturbing them was a violation that could bring cosmic retribution. As Carter and his team continued cataloging the treasures, more than 5,000 items in total, the scale of their find became clearer. There were thrones, daggers made of meteoric iron, chariots, jewelry, and strange ritual objects whose purposes were lost to time. Each artifact told a fragment of the boy king's story. Yet Tutankhamun himself remained a mystery. Why had he died so young? Was it an accident, illness, or something more sinister? Carter noted the mummy had been burned after burial, its body charred in an unusual way. Later studies would suggest this might have been due to a chemical reaction during a rushed embalming, but to some, it was yet another strange and ominous detail. Outside the tomb, the legend of the curse continued to grow. Even in far-off countries, people claimed to feel its reach. A young novelist in London wrote that a strange illness had struck him after touching a small relic from Egypt. In New York, a museum guard swore he saw the eyes of a Tutankhamun statue follow him across the room. Whether these were real experiences or products of imagination, they fueled the myth. Carter tried to ignore the chatter, but privately, he admitted the events surrounding the excavation were unusual. He wrote in his diary about dreams of strange figures moving in the shadows of the tomb, and about the uneasy feeling that he was never truly alone when working there. Then came another blow. Richard Bethel, Carter's secretary, was found dead under mysterious circumstances in 1929. His father, Lord Westbury, later threw himself from a building. Both deaths were quickly linked to the curse in the press. The web of coincidences was becoming harder to dismiss. By the time the treasures of Tutankhamun began touring the world decades later, the curse had become inseparable from the king's legacy. People queued for hours to see the golden mask, the amulets, the glittering relics, and they whispered to each other about the price paid by those who first laid eyes on them in the tomb. Yet, despite the mounting stories, one detail often went unnoticed. Howard Carter himself lived another 17 years after the discovery, dying peacefully at the age of 64. No curse claimed him directly. Was he protected by his respect for the artifacts? Or was the curse nothing more than an extraordinary series of coincidences amplified by human imagination? Scientists in later years would suggest rational explanations for the cursed deaths, pointing to possible toxic mold spores or bacteria sealed in the tomb for millennia, capable of causing fatal infections in those who breathed them in. Others argued that psychological suggestion, the power of belief, played a role in weakening the health of those convinced they were doomed. Still, for many, these explanations were far less thrilling than the idea of an ancient pharaoh reaching across time to punish those who disturbed his rest. Answer: the curse endured, a shadow cast across one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history. But the truth, perhaps, was far more complex and far more fascinating than the legend alone. Shadows in the Golden Mask. By the mid-20th century, the legend of the curse had woven itself so deeply into popular culture that it was almost impossible to separate fact from fiction. Films, radio dramas, and novels romanticized the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, always with an air of danger and supernatural vengeance. The golden mask of the boy king became a symbol of beauty, mystery, and death, gleaming with a strange allure that drew millions to exhibitions around the world. But beneath the spectacle, scholars and scientists were working quietly to uncover the real story. In the years following the excavation, researchers began to re-examine every detail surrounding Tutankhamun's life and death. Radiographs of the mummy revealed a fractured skull, sparking theories that the young pharaoh had been murdered by a blow to the head. Some historians pointed to political tensions in his court. Tutankhamun had reversed the religious reforms of his predecessor Akhenaten, restoring the traditional gods and priesthoods. Could this have made him enemies powerful enough to orchestrate his death? Others believed the injury might have occurred after death, possibly during a hasty and careless embalming process. Then, in the early 2000s, CT scans offered a clearer picture. Tutankhamun had suffered a severe leg fracture shortly before his death, and his body showed signs of malaria infection. It was possible that the combination of the injury and disease proved fatal. Yet, these findings did little to dispel the darker, more sensational theories that still swirled around the young king. While scientists debated the cause of death, another question lingered in the public mind: was the curse real, and if so, could it be explained? Microbiologists proposed that sealed tombs might harbor deadly fungi and bacteria, such as Aspergillus niger or Histoplasma capsulatum, which could cause respiratory failure in people with weakened immune systems. Studies of other ancient sites revealed similar microbial hazards. This theory provided a rational explanation for the deaths linked to the tomb, but there was a catch. Howard Carter himself, who spent the most time inside the tomb, remained unaffected. Some researchers argued that the so-called curse was more psychological than biological. The human mind, once convinced of doom, could induce physical symptoms through stress, fear, and anxiety. In the 1920s, with the world still fascinated by the exoticism of Egypt, such beliefs could spread like wildfire. A person who read about the curse in the newspapers and later fell ill might genuinely believe they were its victim, worsening their condition. Still, modern skepticism has not erased the curse's mystique. In 1972, when the treasures of Tutankhamun were loaned to the British Museum, a curator involved in unpacking them died suddenly of a stroke. The press resurrected the curse headlines, and attendance at the exhibition surged to record-breaking numbers. Similar incidents followed during later exhibitions in Paris, New York, and Tokyo, each reinforcing the legend in the minds of the public. Even in Egypt, stories persisted. Guides in the Valley of the Kings whispered to tourists about strange accidents during restoration work. In one widely reported incident in the 1990s, a group of workers fell ill after moving artifacts from a storage site. Though medical reports cited ordinary illness, many Egyptians saw the invisible hand of the ancient gods at work. For the Egyptian government, the curse became a double-edged sword. On one hand, it attracted millions of visitors and boosted the tourism industry. On the other, it risked reinforcing stereotypes and overshadowing the true historical significance of the discovery. Yet, in a way, the curse's endurance reflects something deeply human, our fascination with the unseen, the possibility that ancient powers might still touch our world. It connects us to a time when life and death were interwoven with ritual, when kings were buried with the belief that they would rule in the afterlife for eternity. The tomb of Tutankhamun, with its treasures perfectly preserved for over 3,000 years, is not just a window into Egypt's past, it is a mirror reflecting our own desire to find meaning in mystery. Today, scientists, historians, and spiritual seekers alike continue to study the artifacts, decoding the stories etched into the golden stone. The boy king himself has traveled farther in death than he ever did in life, his image appearing on coins, posters, and even comic books. Yet his eyes, as carved into the golden mask, still gaze forward with an expression that seems to know something we do not. Whether that knowledge is of divine realms or simply the truth of his own short and tragic life, we may never know. Answer: the curse, real or imagined, remains part of his legacy, a shadow that moves silently alongside the brilliance of his treasures. As long as Tutankhamun's name is spoken, as long as his story is told, the legend will live on, forever blurring the line between history and myth. The Eternal Watcher. As the 21st century unfolded, the story of Tutankhamun entered yet another chapter, one that blurred the boundary between archaeology, entertainment, and global fascination. In museums across the world, the golden mask and treasures of the boy king drew lines of visitors that snaked for hours through exhibition halls. The artifacts seemed to glow under modern lighting, each piece whispering of gods, rituals, and a world that had once flourished on the banks of the Nile. But beyond the beauty, there was still an undercurrent of unease, a lingering belief that disturbing the king's rest came with a price. The Egyptian government, aware of both the benefits and dangers of such legends, began using the story of the curse as part of a carefully managed narrative. Official tour guides were instructed to mention it just enough to spark curiosity, but not enough to frighten visitors away. International documentaries were produced, each promising to reveal the truth behind the curse, only to leave audiences with more questions than answers. In 2005, a team of Egyptian scientists performed DNA tests on Tutankhamun's remains, revealing a tangled web of genetic disorders likely caused by generations of royal inbreeding. The scans confirmed that the boy king had a clubfoot, making it difficult for him to walk unaided, and that he likely needed a cane, several of which were found in his tomb. This was not the image of a powerful warrior king that earlier generations had imagined, but rather a fragile teenager who had been placed on the throne of the world's greatest empire. The revelation did nothing to diminish his appeal. In fact, it deepened it, adding a human vulnerability to his story that resonated with people across the globe. Meanwhile, archaeologists working in the Valley of the Kings began to discover new clues about the burial itself. Some believed that Tutankhamun's death was so sudden that his tomb had not been fully prepared. Evidence suggested that parts of the burial chamber's paint had been applied too hastily, trapping moisture that caused chemical reactions over time. The most startling find came when researchers detected scorch marks on the walls, signs that a flash fire had erupted inside the sealed tomb shortly after burial, possibly due to a chemical reaction between the oils used in embalming and the oxygen trapped inside. Was this strange incident later woven into the curse's narrative? Some thought so. Yet even with all these scientific revelations, the supernatural element refused to fade. In 2010, during a major political uprising in Egypt, looters broke into the Cairo Museum, damaging several artifacts from Tutankhamun's tomb. Soon after, some of the looters reportedly fell ill or suffered accidents, fueling whispers that the curse had struck again. Local newspapers ran sensational headlines, and social media amplified the rumors, making the legend viral for a new generation. Across the ocean, Hollywood continued to mine the story for inspiration. Films, television series, and even video games placed Tutankhamun's treasures at the center of elaborate plots involving ancient spells, hidden chambers, and undead guardians. While these fictional depictions were far removed from historical reality, they kept the name of Tutankhamun alive in the collective imagination. Scholars sometimes expressed frustration that the real history was being overshadowed by fantasy, but many also recognized that this ongoing fascination brought renewed attention and funding to the study of ancient Egypt. In 2018, radar scans of the tomb made headlines when experts speculated that hidden chambers might exist behind its walls. The possibility of undiscovered rooms immediately revived dreams of finding Queen Nefertiti's burial or other treasures from the Amarna period. Though later studies cast doubt on these findings, the very idea that the tomb might still hold secrets was enough to reignite the world's curiosity. And always, in the background, there was the curse, a story so persistent that it had become part of the archaeological landscape itself. Some scientists joked that even if the curse did not exist, humanity had invented one powerful enough to influence behavior and decisions. Others, more quietly, admitted that they felt an unexplainable reverence when entering the tomb, as though the air itself carried the weight of centuries. Visitors often described the same sensation, a silence so profound that it seemed to press against the skin, broken only by the faint echoes of their own footsteps. Standing before the golden mask, many felt as if Tutankhamun's eyes, calm, steady, eternal, were following them, not with malice, but with an ageless awareness. Perhaps that was the true curse, the inability to forget him once you had looked into those eyes. Today, as Egypt prepares for the grand opening of the new Grand Egyptian Museum, where Tutankhamun's treasures will be displayed together for the first time since the discovery, the world waits once more to see him. Scholars will speak of history, science, and culture. Tourists will snap photographs, buy souvenirs, and tell their friends about the wonder they have witnessed. But somewhere in the shadows, the legend will still breathe. Because no matter how much science explains, no matter how many facts are laid bare, the human heart will always crave mystery. And in the story of Tutankhamun, mystery is eternal. The boy king, who reigned for less than a decade, has now ruled the imagination of the world for a century, his name whispered in awe from Cairo to California, from Tokyo to London. He is no longer just a historical figure, he is an immortal presence, a symbol of beauty, tragedy, and the tantalizing possibility that some secrets are not meant to be fully known. Long after the last visitor leaves the museum and the lights go dim, the golden mask will still gleam in the dark, and the eyes of Tutankhamun will still watch, unblinking, over all who dared to disturb his sleep. In that gaze lies the truth of the curse, not a spell carved in stone, but a bond between the living and the dead, a reminder that history is not gone, but alive, waiting, and watching. And as long as we return to his story, as long as we step into that silent chamber in our minds, Tutankhamun will remain what he has always been, the eternal watcher.